I've been there once at Muhammad Ali Center. Never mind. His powerful oratory and charisma helped making him a national figure, the civil rights movement. Ladies and gentlemen, when you're talking about how prison has turned Malcolm X into such a person, just remind me of Foucault. When we talk about Foucault and his post-modernity, we would enjoy very much when we read Malcolm X's autobiography or when we watch the movie. But sometimes movie there's a lot of, commercialization element. But when we read autobiography, you would manage to appreciate and understand more of post-modernity and post-colonialism. Yeah, before when looking at Prof. Farid, just remind me of post-colonialism. As you remember how Malcolm started to realize the hegemony of the West, of the white people, when it comes to knowledge, even in shaping the knowledge. To understand Foucault's phrase, knowledge is power, one must read Malcolm X's autobiography. You would appreciate more. Malcolm's ideology contrasted sharply, initially with that of mainstream civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. While King promoted non-violent integration, Malcolm emphasized self-defense and the need for a separate black identity, akin to many other popular black movements like Black Panther and others. His signature catchphrase since 1964 speech, "by any means necessary," sets the tone in Malcolm X's more militant approach to achieving civil rights. This perspective resonated with many African Americans who felt marginalized by the mainstream movement. In the early 1960s, Malcolm X began to grow disillusioned with the Nation of Islam, particularly after learning of its leader, Elijah Muhammad's personal failings. This disillusionment led him to leave Nation of Islam in 1964, after which he made a pilgrimage to Mecca, where he embraced Sunni Islam and adopted the name Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. This experience profoundly changed his worldview, leading him to see the struggle of civil rights as part of a broader global fight against colonialism and expression. And to understand and to appreciate Malcolm X's harsh journey, one must read Muhammad Assad's and Shariatis. Otherwise, you wouldn't appreciate Hajj as what it is. I mean, Hajj always being viewed by many Malaysians as part of their Rukun Iman, nothing wrong, Rukun Islam, which is nothing wrong about it, but it has been treated as a mere ibadah or spirit. I'm not sure whether it's spiritual journey, but just like any other ibadah, you relinquish your responsibility and that's it. You're coming back as Hajj or Hajjah. But for Malcolm X and Assad and Shariati and many others, this spiritual journey means more than that. It teaches us about humanity. It teaches us about brotherhood. It teaches us about humility. It teaches us about the global, universal love that should be embraced by all Muslims. Ladies and gentlemen, after his Hajj, Malcolm X returned to the United States with a renewed sense of hope and a desire for unity among all oppressed peoples, regardless of their race. He began to advocate for a more inclusive approach to civil rights, emphasizing the importance of solidarity among marginalized communities. His life story, particularly as recounted in the autobiography of Malcolm X, has become an essential text for understanding the complexities of race relations in America. Malcolm X's legacy extends beyond his immediate impact on the civil rights movement. He played a crucial role in introducing Islam to many African Americans, significantly increasing interest in the religion within Black communities. His teachings on self-empowerment, racial pride, and social justice continue to resonate today, inspiring movements for racial equality and justice around the world. And he has inspired many people, I mean, regardless of their race, but mainly the black people and, the African communities in the United States, including the lips of the Louisville. Louisville, that's the name. Muhammad Ali was known as the lips of Louisville. Louisville is where he came from. And why he was known of that? Because of lips. I mean, because his mouth. When he respond to interviews, when he respond to people, and particularly he was inspired by Malcolm X. As I remember in many of his interviews, he kept praising Malcolm X. And nowadays when people talking about Mike Tyson, maybe not a good example, unlike Muhammad Ali. But anyway, they were amongst those who were inspired by Malcolm X. Malcolm's emphasis on self-determination and dignity for black people has influenced numerous social justice movements, including those within Muslim communities, fostering a sense of identity and purpose among African American Muslims. Ladies and gentlemen, and talking about this, about social justice and civil rights movement, it just reminds me of our conversation just now with Professor Bagrami and Prof. Farid. We were talking about few forgotten names, unfortunately, that has a lot to do with the fight for social justice. A global figure like Che Guevara. So inshallah, Haji Jamal, our next event would be something on Che Guevara and Cuban Revolution. Maybe on the May the 20th. Maybe not many people will be happy with that. Brothers and sisters, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim has frequently expressed admiration for Malcolm X's life and teachings, highlighting him as a powerful symbol of resistance and empowerment for marginalized communities. He particularly acknowledges Malcolm X's relevance in addressing the challenges faced by Muslims and people of color worldwide. Anwar's reflections on Malcolm X resonate with a broader trend in the Malay world, where Malcolm X's legacy is often celebrated and mobilized as a source of inspiration for social justice movements and political activism amongst Muslim youth. Additionally, Malcolm X is often viewed as a modern representation of figures like Bilal bin Rabah, one of the closest Sahaba of Prophet Muhammad, who also faced oppression, and other Sahaba of the same skin color, who were deprived and humiliated due to their origin, due to their skin color, or according to their social status. But once they became Muslim, Islam uplifted their name. Many of great Sahaba that we did not realize, they were blacks, including Rasulullah SAW, adopted son, and few big tabi'in, big mufassirin, they were from black people. But when we mention the name of Sahaba, we mention the name of the scholars, we never bother about their skin color. But they were, in reality, have a darker skin color in compared to others, and people of their same skin color has been treated inhumanly by others throughout centuries. This comparison underscores Malcolm X's role in preaching Islam and advocating for justice beyond the confines of his own community. Anwar Ibrahim's engagement with Malcolm X's legacy illustrates the enduring impact of Malcolm's idea on contemporary political discourse and activism within Muslim communities. Ladies and gentlemen, as we reflect on Malcolm X's enduring legacy, we find profound inspiration for the Muslim global society in this challenging period. His life and teachings reminds us of the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity, advocating for love, for happiness, for mutual respect, and embracing the transformative power of faith. In the context of the struggles we witness today, whether in Gaza, Sudan, Kashmir, or other parts of the world, Malcolm X's call for justice and equality resonates deeply. His vision of unity among oppressed peoples, and his commitment to human dignity are guiding principles that can help us navigate the complex landscape of contemporary global challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, Malcolm X was assassinated on February the 21st, 1965, about 6 decades ago. But his ideas and struggles remain a vital part of the discourse on race and identity in America and beyond. His call for justice and equality continues to inspire new generations seeking to confront systemic racism and advocate for human rights. As we gather today, let us carry forward his legacy, working tirelessly to build a world where peace, justice, love, happiness, and mutual respect prevail. I mean, it was a couple of days ago. I think it's very timely to have this event today. As a couple of days ago, we have seen the ugliest face of the white supremacist ideology and the white hegemony in the United Kingdom. I still remember when I was in the hotel of Manchester, I can listen to the chanting and to the noises that be made by all the protesters on the street of Manchester, asking the people of color to leave the UK, asking others to leave the UK, and trying to bring back the glory of the white British. I mean, this is a reality, and we could listen to Trump's rhetoric in his campaigns nowadays. Nothing has changed, and it's timely to bring back the voice of humanity, the voice of human dignity, and the voice of love. With that, I wish fruitful discussion that we will have today. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi and salam sejahtera.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you very much, Dr. Muslim Malik, the chairman, IAIS Malaysia. This is indeed an eye-opener, a very inspiring and captivating keynote address with which we better understand who Malcolm X was. Indeed, his journey to Mecca, to pilgrimage, was a turning point in his life, because it was after that, in fact, through his letter from Mecca, that he changed his own movement from racism to humanity. And he declared that we need to expand the civil rights struggle to higher levels. And the higher levels, he meant civil, or rather human rights beyond civil rights. And of course, this is what we need to take as we live today in the world where racism, white supremacy, xenophobia, Islamophobia, Africaphobia, and all sorts of phobia that are happening within us as humans. What are our contributions to changing the trajectories of the world under our watch, whether by our voices, by the power of our pens, or by what we write with our keyboards and keypads? This is a challenge to all of us. But before we move into the forum, I would like to call our attention particularly to a short video that the organizers of this very important event want us to watch. A summary of the 40-year lived Malcolm X from 1925 to 1965. Happy viewing, and I hope we will have a very important lesson to learn from
itself as the free world and a democracy, and at the same time has 22 million of its citizens who aren't permitted citizenship. Why that in itself reflects lunacy.
Malcolm X was a civil rights crusader, black nationalist, and Muslim minister. He was born Malcolm Little on May 19, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. Malcolm's father was a Baptist preacher and outspoken supporter of Black activist Marcus Garvey. As a result, the Littles were frequently terrorized by white supremacist groups. Despite his family's attempts to evade harassment, young Malcolm felt the trauma of racist violence firsthand when his father was killed under mysterious circumstances. A brilliant student, Malcolm was discouraged and demeaned by white teachers, who ultimately pushed him to drop out of school at age 15. Bouncing between Boston, Flint, and Harlem during his teenage years, Malcolm turned to crime to get by. In 1946, at age 21, he was arrested for burglary and sentenced with 8 to 10 years in prison. While incarcerated, Malcolm developed a new and radical worldview based in liberation and self-determination. Through the influence of fellow prisoner John Bembry, Malcolm became an insatiable reader. He soon found himself drawn to the teachings of the Nation of Islam, a pro-Black religious group led by Elijah Muhammad. Accepting his new faith, Malcolm severed ties to the past, changing his last name to X as a representation of his lost African surname. After his release on parole in 1952, he worked to develop the nation's ministry and expand its membership. In 1958, Malcolm married fellow NOI devotee Betty Shabazz, with whom he would have 6 children. Malcolm's rapid rise in the organization mirrored the electrifying appeal of his teachings among African Americans. The wider public caught a glimpse of his movement's power one night in 1957, when Malcolm organized hundreds of Black Muslims in Harlem to ensure the safety of Hinton Johnson, a hospitalized victim of police violence. Malcolm's vision of Black nationalism, which did not rule out violence as a means of overcoming white oppression, was met with fear and skepticism from mainstream white audiences and quickly attracted the attention of the FBI. Still, Malcolm's role as a powerful voice in the civil rights struggle continued to build momentum. By the early 60s, however, Malcolm had grown disillusioned with the Nation of Islam after learning of Elijah Muhammad's extramarital affairs. In 1963, Malcolm publicly cut ties with the organization. Shortly thereafter, he traveled to Mecca and Cairo on a cultural journey that reaffirmed his faith and cultivated his hope for a peaceful resolution to the struggle for racial equality. Still, Malcolm X's return home was not easy. Death threats, many from followers of Elijah Muhammad, plagued him and his family. Eager to make a lasting statement, Malcolm X collaborated with writer Alex Haley on an autobiography. Sadly, he would never see the book's success. On February 21st, 1965, before a speech in Manhattan's Audubon Ballroom, Malcolm X was shot to death by 3 members of the Nation of Islam. While Malcolm's journey was cut tragically short, his words and spirit continue to shed light on the nature of inequality and the path to peace. He remains one of the most influential figures in American history.
I hope this is inspiring and, of course, a reflection of a life lived from adversity to advocacy, who has transformed many lives, and his legacy is still fresh within our minds. This is a forum, as we call it, where experts will be here to share their own ideas from the past to see how we can better the present for the best future. Islam is a very important religion, and of course, the import from Quran 49, verse 13, is a call to humanity, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qabaila lita'arafu, inna akramakum inda Allahi atqakum. God is saying that, O children of Adam, I have created you from a pair of a male and female, and made you into nations and tribes so that you recognize one another. So the difference in color, the diversity in the languages we speak, the geographical locations we come from, they are nothing but rather identifiers to help us know one another. I trust the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam who said, "Kullukum min Adam wa Adam min turab," that all of you are from Adam and Adam is from the soil. La fadla li Arabi ala ajami wala li abyada ala aswada illa bi taqwa. He said, certainly you are all from Adam, and Adam is created from clay. There is no superiority of a white over a black, such that there is no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab. This is what we call humanity, and I trust this forum will, inshallah, shape our minds and to rejuvenate our own thinkings towards actualizing this spirit. May I invite Brother Muhammad Azhar Muhammad, a researcher at the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, to come and moderate this very important session where we will have a discourse on empowerment and equality, continuing Malcolm X's vision. Brother Muhammad, come to the stage as you welcome the panelists, and I hope that inshallah we give our rapt attention with emphatic listening to get the gist of the discourse. Enjoy the session with Brother Muhammad Azhar Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. MC, Mr. Aliu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sejahtera, salam madani, greetings, and a very good morning to everyone. Yang berbahagia, Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti, Chairman, Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, IKIM, Dr. Mazli Malik, Chairman of IAIS Malaysia, Haji Engineer Muhammad Jamaluddin Samsudin, CEO, Allied Coordinating Committee of Islamic NGOs, ASIN, Professor Dr. Syed Farid Al-Attas, National University of Singapore, NUS, Associate Professor Dr. Ridwan Fontaine, Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences, KEMS, IIUM, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the conference hall at the IAIS Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, we are excited to inform you that today's forum is also live streamed on Facebook. For those watching this forum online, we encourage you to share this live stream with your friends and colleagues, like our Facebook page, and leave a comment. Your engagement helps us to reach a wider audience and foster to a more interactive discussion. Today, we are honored to organize the forum Legacy of Malcolm X, a journey of empowerment and equality by IAIS Malaysia in collaboration with ASIN. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank all participants for attending today's forum and to our viewers who are watching live on Facebook. My name is Muhammad Azhar bin Muhammad, analyst at IAIS Malaysia, and it's a great pleasure for me to serve as your forum moderator today. Before we begin, I would like to invite our panelists, Dr. Ridwan Fontaine and Professor Dr. Syed Farid Al-Attas, to come on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Malcolm X was a charismatic speaker and a sharp critic of the mainstream civil rights movement, which he believed was too accommodating to white society. He famously advocated for black self-determination, self-defense, and economic independence. His views evolved over time, especially after his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1964, where he embraced a more inclusive vision of racial unity and began advocating for human rights on a global scale. This forum seeks to educate participants about his life and philosophy, discuss the relevance of his ideas today, and inspire continued efforts for equality and empowerment. Before we begin, please allow me to introduce to our distinguished line of panelists. Our first discussion on my left is Professor Dr. Syed Farid Al-Atas, who is no stranger to IAIS Malaysia. He is a distinguished professor of sociology and has been with NUS since 1992. Before joining NUS, he lectured at the University of Malaya, UM, in the Department of Southeast Asian Studies. His research interests are diverse and include historical sociology, the sociology of social science, the sociology of religion, and interreligious dialogue. Alongside Professor Syed Farid Al-Atas is Associate Professor Dr. Ridwan Fontaine. He is an Associate Professor at the Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences, KEMS, at the International Islamic University Malaysia, IIUM. He specializes in economic business management, focusing on Islamic management and leadership in Islam. Before we proceed, please allow me to outline the format for today's discussion. Our esteemed discussion will be allocated 30 minutes to share their insights. Afterwards, depending on our time, we will open to the floor for Q&A session. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Syed Farid Al-Atas to deliver his presentation.
Dr. Masli Malik, Chairman of IAIS Malaysia, Haji Muhammad Jamaluddin Samsudin, CEO, Allied Coordinating Committee of Islamic NGOs, and Professor Ridwan Fontaine. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'd like to begin what I want to do is to say a few words about the significance of the thought of Malcolm X. But I want to preface that with a few words on the neglect of the thought of Africans and the African diaspora. In Malaysia in particular, I would say that the dominant view in academia, but also outside academia, is kind of derogatory, perspective or derogatory understanding of Africa and its culture. When I say Africa, I don't mean only Africans from the continent of Africa, but also the diaspora of Africans, which has spread, widely spread in the United States, but also in South America, Central America, in the Caribbean, so-called West Indies, as well as in various parts of Europe. And I think in Malaysia, we are, and I'm referring also to academics, we are quite unaware of the tremendous contribution of thinkers and activists and scholars from Africa and its diaspora to critical thinking, to critical thought, to the centuries of anti-colonial movements around the world, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. It's probably it is probably the case that the thinkers of the African diaspora, of Africa and the African diaspora, were the only thinkers that had profound influence throughout the global South. Not only among their own communities in Africa or among the diaspora, but also in Latin America and in Asia. So you have a situation where great thinkers, anti-colonial thinkers like Albert Memmi or Frantz Fanon were not only influential in their immediate communities. Aimé Césaire and Frantz Fanon were from Martinique, but they were also influential throughout Asia and Africa and Latin America. And it is rare to find thinkers from Asia who had such an influence. So, unfortunately, in our universities in Malaysia, we have neglected the thought of Africans and those from the African diaspora. Now, as I was saying, Africans had led centuries of thought, of anti-colonial thought, the intellectual movement that was anti-colonial, that dealt with the relationship or the entanglement between capitalist exploitation, racism, slavery, and colonialism. Now, among this diaspora, among the people of the African diaspora were the African American thinkers. And before Malcolm X, one of the most prominent was W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois was a sociologist, an economist, who was the originator of the first school of sociology in America. A lot of people consider the Chicago School as the first school of sociology, but in reality it was the Atlanta School where W.E.B. Du Bois taught, that preceded the Chicago School. So when I say school, I don't mean the institution, but a tradition of thought. This was established by W.E.B. Du Bois when he was a researcher at Atlanta University. And you have other African American thinkers who contributed tremendously to our understanding of how race and exploitation go hand in hand. Because I think one of the important lessons of these thinkers is that the system that we live in today, capitalism, is fundamentally an exploitative system which requires all kinds of differences. The severe dehumanizing exploitation of the vast majority of human beings on this planet can only take place if the people at the top are able to differentiate themselves from those that they exploit. It's very difficult to exploit people to the extent of dehumanizing them if those people are very similar to you. You see what I'm saying? For example, we find it easy to crush a cockroach, but we find it difficult to crush a cat or even a rat, and certainly a monkey, a chimpanzee, because they are closer to us. We see more humanity in a cat, in a dog, than we do in a cockroach. The same thing goes with fellow human beings. When we see human beings, have the same culture as us, the same skin color, the same values, the same religion, far more difficult to dehumanize them as compared to human beings that we encounter who are very different from us and whom we feel are inferior to us. So with the first series of European colonization, the European colonization of the Americas, when Christopher Columbus arrived in America, the dominant view among the Spaniards and later the Portuguese was that the natives of America were subhuman. And this view about their subhuman status was debated in the Catholic Church in Spain. One position was that Native Americans were subhuman, and therefore it was justified to enslave them. So you see this idea that there are other people, other humans who are not as human as we are, who are less than human, was a necessary idea in order to justify enslavement and, in general, economic exploitation. So we find that from the very beginnings of capitalism and colonialism, the people exploited by European colonizers were non-white people. And that continues until today. The most exploited people in the world today are people of color, so-called people of color, right? Blacks, browns, so on and so forth. Maybe not in the form of slavery as it was in the past, but in the form of other forms of exploitative labor. So this is the context in which we I think, should be interested in Malcolm X. Now, coming to Malcolm X, I would also want to suggest that Malay studies should look at Black studies as an exemplar. That Malay studies, and I'm referring specifically to Malay studies in Malaysia, should be a kind of should have a kind of approach that is critical, hard-hitting, and non-hypocritical. Critical and not hypocritical, hard-hitting, that looks at reality as it is, exposes problems, exposes exploitation, exposes corruption, and so on and so forth. This is what we have to learn from Black studies. And of course, Malcolm X is a very important figure who contributed to Black studies in the United States. Indeed, we can say that Malcolm X embodies what came to be known as critical theory or critical thought. Now, the thing about critical theory is that it is any form of theorizing which is critical of domination and inequality in history, in the past, as well as in our contemporary society. Critical theory not only theorizes about these problems, but more importantly, advocates for the transformation of society and for the emancipation of the dominated. And this is what Black studies is founded upon, and this is what I believe Malay studies should be founded upon. Now, when we look at Malcolm X, and we consider his views, which we can understand his views as constituting critical theory. I want to discuss three aspects of the views of Malcolm X. The one is his critique of history. The next is the problem of the uncritical mind. And the third is the role of intellectuals. So these are three dimensions of Malcolm X thought. There are many other dimensions, but we don't have the time to talk about all of them. So I want to discuss these three dimensions. Now, first of all, the critique of history. Now, Malcolm X regarded the study of history as very important because it dealt with the past, it dealt with the origin of a thing, it dealt with the origin of a problem, whether you're talking about a person or a nation or other things. And for Malcolm X, knowing the origins meant acquiring a better understanding of the phenomenon in question. Going back to the past would result in African Americans knowing that they were not always at the level that they were in contemporary America, right? So, because in contemporary America, in Malcolm X's time, African Americans felt themselves to be an inferior people, and often felt themselves to be an inferior people because of their culture, because of their traditions, not because of slavery or not because of exploitation. In very much the same way that in Malaysia or in this region, there is this idea of the myth of the lazy native. There is this idea that Malays have incapacities because they are Malays. Jose Rizal dealt with a similar issue in his time, because after 300 years of Spanish colonization, it was drilled into the minds of the Filipinos that they were an inferior people because of their culture, because of their pre-Christian religion, because of their genes. They were inherently an inferior people. The Spaniards also promoted for all those centuries, the idea that Filipinos were lazy people, and inherently lazy people. And just like Malcolm X, Jose Rizal said that we need to study the pre-colonial history of the Filipinos, where we can see that Filipinos were an advanced people. They controlled trade routes. They had industry. They had shipping industry, for example. They built ships, so on and so forth. They had kingdoms. They had rational law, a legal system. In other words, they were not an inferior people. And if they were inferior today, it is because of colonialism. This was Rizal's logic. So in other words, as Malcolm X said, going to history to study your past, to know that you are not the same the way you are today. This was his reason for studying history in a critical manner. Now, the problem is one of the problems for Malcolm X was that the average Negro, as they were called in his time, the average African American was not able to think in this way, was not able to think critically. The average African American had what Syed Hussein Alatas would have called the captive mind. Was the captive mind. You know what we call in Malay the minda tertawan. Right? Now it's interesting that Malcolm X himself had referred to this as an Uncle Tom. The Uncle Tom. Oh, there's a famous American novel by Harriet Beecher Stowe called Uncle Tom's Cabin. There's a character called Uncle Tom, black character. Now Malcolm X actually refers to this character. Now what Malcolm X says is that see, he made this distinction between the house Negro and the field Negro. The house Negro, the field Negro was the Negro working out in the fields, was exploited, did back-breaking work, had a hard life. And he resented and hated the master, the slave owner. The house Negro worked in the house, as a valet, as a something like a housekeeper. But he worked in the house, lived in the house, and over time developed more of sort of identified himself and with the master and cared more for the master. So the house Negro was less critical of his state of slavery as in comparison with the field Negro. Malcolm was saying that house Negro was something like Uncle Tom, right? Uncle Tom was this, African black or Negro character who was taught by the white man to teach Negroes to love thine enemy, right? To teach Negroes to love their masters and to keep them from resisting slavery. So this was the problem. This refers to the problem of this social and cultural conditioning that prevented African Americans from thinking critically about their state of slavery, from thinking critically about the political economy of the United States, and their place on their role in that system. Now, Malcolm X also wrote about the role of intellectuals. And as far as he was concerned, the primary role of the intellectuals should be to promote or adopt black nationalism. Now, of course, there are some similarities and I think lessons that we should learn from Malcolm X that are relevant to us in Malaysia. I think the idea of house Negro and field Negro are very interesting ideas. The critique of history, and in that context, the entanglement between racism, and capitalism, and colonial and slavery are important ideas that we can learn from when we study our own history. But of course, there are other ideas which perhaps are less relevant, but still important for us to understand. One of those is black nationalism. Perhaps that idea is not... Black nationalism, as advocated by Malcolm X, can be misunderstood and misapplied in the context of Malaysia. Because we may imagine that Malay nationalism is the parallel of black nationalism. But I think we should be careful about that, because it's, the contexts are entirely different. But when Malcolm X said black nationalism, he meant that the black man must control the radio, the newspapers, and the television for their own communities. And he also meant that they must do these things necessary to elevate themselves socially, culturally, and to restore racial dignity, but not to promote reverse racism, not to distort, not to control the media and so on and so forth, to distort reality in favor of blacks, right? In the way that the white control media distorts reality in favor of whites. So we want to talk about Malay nationalism. I think that's fine, but not in the sense of kind of nativism that distorts reality. For example, when some of the Malay nativist scholars say that the history of Malaysia is the history of the Malays, and that the contribution of the non-Malays is insignificant or less significant, or are merely fragments. This would be an example of Malay nationalism gone wrong. Indeed, we do have these problems. We have some of these kinds of extremist nationalist ideas even in our school textbooks. Now, how much time lost track? Are you keeping again? Wrap it up, okay. Now, I was very happy that this event was organized, because one of our problems in our education system, and this is true of the entire global South to varying degrees, but it is particularly a problem in Southeast Asia, other parts of Asia, that we tend to neglect intellectual traditions beyond the West. And even when it comes to the West, our attention to intellectual traditions is very narrow. We pay more attention to the American and British intellectual traditions. And even when it comes to the American and British intellectual traditions, it is more to the mainstream traditions. So, for example, there's very little interest in Malaysia on African American thought. There's very little interest in Malaysia on indigenous thought associated with North American indigenous thought, or the you call it First Nation, the thought of the First Nation people. When it comes to Australia, New Zealand, it's the same thing. We may know some Australian works, but we have very little interest in indigenous thought. When it comes to Europe, we are more or less oblivious to the entire tradition of European thought. We know British conservative ideas. We may know some of the French works, only those which are translated to English and which become popular in America. Then we receive these ideas. So we know Foucault and Bourdieu because they've been translated to English and they became popular in America. But the rest of French thinking, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, not to mention the entire Russian tradition, are more or less unknown to us and are not taught in our universities. This is something we really need to rectify. Even worse is our neglect of intellectual traditions from the Malay world. And for that reason, Malay studies in Malaysia is most backward. And it is interesting, but also on the other hand, a matter of shame for us to have to admit that Malay studies in Malaysia does not dominate the field of Malay studies on a global scale. That we do not control or command the discourse on Malay studies, on Malay topics. For example, if I give you the example of historiography, for example, we have not defined the field. The same thing, sociology, anthropology of the Malay world. Right? We do not. I will just give you a very simple example. There, in the anthropology of Indonesia, when I say Malay, I mean the Malay world. Yeah. When you talk about anthropology of Indonesia, there are 2 or 3 central concepts in the study of Indonesian society, which have become very well known among anthropologists and sociologists and even historians. These are concepts of abangan, santri, and priai. These are from the Javanese language. But these were concepts that were developed by foreign scholar, not Indonesians themselves. The foreign scholar, of course, in this case is Clifford Geertz. I don't believe there has been one Indonesian scholar who has created, a theory, concept that has influenced the study of Indonesian society. And the same thing goes for us here in Malaysia. So this attention to intellectual traditions, including our own, is very important in order for us to progress. That, of course, requires revamping our education system, requires shaking ourselves, off the, from the session with ranking, because with the ranking system, you are continuously trying to compare yourselves with the top universities in America. We're trying to be like them. In others, we are being Uncle Toms, right? We are. It is as if we are trying to be, or we are, being like the house Negroes. So that's why these ideas from Malcolm X are so important. Just to symbolize that, and I would end with that. Malcolm X used to straighten his hair. Because Negroes were ashamed of their curly hair. It wasn't beautiful. They were not good looking. They were not pretty. So the women especially, but sometimes also the men, would straighten their hair to be more good looking, to be like white people. Right? Later on, he was to severely criticize that idea of straightening the hair. He would talk about it against that. I think it was Fanon who said that phenomenon of wanting to be like the white man, He referred to it as lactification, from the word lactose, right? Milk, be like the white man. And this is a shameful thing to be. Now, throughout the global south in our education system, we are that. We have been lactifying ourselves for decades or even centuries. Malcolm X became shameful of that and wanted to be his own person. That is what maybe the most important lesson we can learn, to be shameful of our situation, in which we are Uncle Toms, in which we are house Negroes, and that we should be our own people, and therefore take a more serious interest in our intellectual traditions. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you to Professor Dr. Sheikh Farid Al-Atas for his enlightening presentation just now. Let us move on to our next distinguished panelist, Associate Professor Dr. Ridwan Fortin, to deliver his presentation. Dr. Ridwan, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So this is my timer. So inshallah, I will stick to the time. I say that because people wonder, why is he looking at his phone? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang bahagia Dato Dr. Muhammad Nur Munati, my former colleague and close friend Dr. Mazli Malik, Haji Engineer Mohammed Jamaluddin Samsuddin, and Professor Dr. Said Farid Al-Atas, and all invited guests and I guess people who are online. Assalamualaikum barakatuh. So I'm going to share some reflections on Malcolm X. Obviously, that's the theme of the conversation. But in order to do that, I need to talk a little bit about adult learning. So I'll spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about adult learning, and then I will relate that to the life of Malcolm X. So I'm sure all of you are aware that there are 2 main forms of education. One is called pedagogy, and pedagogy is literally teaching children, right? And the way we teach children is we give them facts. If you have a child at school who doesn't know that the capital of France is Paris, so you tell them, this is what you need to memorize. And then we'll give you a test, and if you have scored in the test, then you get a good grade. So pedagogy is really just about learning facts, which makes sense for children. Adult learning is education for adults. By the time people are adults, they already have the facts, but they have formed opinions. They have formed worldviews. And these opinions and worldviews might be useful or counterproductive, right? So for example, as a lecturer, I can guarantee you that the majority of my students have got a worldview that is counterproductive. And their biggest problem is with social media. And I have intense debates with my students about social media and how they're, brainwashed by social media. I say, no, sir, this is the truth. Not the truth, it's social media. It's a distortion of the truth. Now, the thing with adult learning is really, ultimately, it's not about learning new things, but it's about changing people's mindsets. Now, this word mindset is a very tricky word because we use it all the time, but we don't always fully understand what it means. Changing a mindset is something which is very emotionally painful. And I'm going to give you 2 stories to really try to illustrate what is a mindset. So, alhamdulillah, I was born in London in 1970. I was born in a non-Muslim family. In case people were wondering, right? Sometimes people spend the whole lecture trying to figure out what I am. And I converted to Islam in 1993 when I was 23. And at one time I was living in the UK with Malay students. They were doing their postgraduate students and studies and so on and so forth. And I was sharing a house with a friend, Malay friend, and yes, he was getting an allowance, but it wasn't that much. So he used to work part-time, and he used to work in a bakery. And one day he came back home, and he looked at me and said, Ridwan, I've seen something incredible. What did you see? And he said, I saw a Mat Saleh who doesn't know how to read. And what happened was he went to the bakery, he was working on a machine, and there's one of his friends was British, who was working at on a machine that was quite difficult. So it's very hard, and and so he said, why don't you work on this other machine, which is much more, more relaxing? He said, no, I can't work on that machine. I said, why not? I don't know how to read. For him, it was shocking. When he said that to me, my reaction was, yeah, of course. Like, the lack of literacy is a growing problem in European countries. We've known that for decades. But he looked at me and said, no, Ridwan, you don't understand. In Malaysia, if you say that there's a Mat Saleh who doesn't know how to read, like that's, we can't even process that. So I was like, Allah. But I think about it now, and I realize, for me, someone not knowing how to read is a fact, just information. For him, it was something that forced him to reevaluate something that he has taken for granted for so long. That's what I mean by being emotionally painful. Now, the second anecdote that I want to share, I don't know how this is going to go, so inshallah, I'm taking a little bit of a risk. But as I said, I was born in a non-Muslim family, and I actually went through the French education system, which is a very secular system. And of course, I was told all of my life, Islam was spread by the sword. So I arrived to university. I was not Muslim at that time. I was 22 years old, 21, 22 years old. And it just happened that in my final year, I was living with a group of Malay students. I meet these Malay students for the first time, and my first question to them was, when did the Muslim army invade you? And they looked at me like if I had said the stupidest thing in the world, which of course I had. But it was, again, for them, it's just a fact. Like, no, nobody ever invaded Malaysia. Like, don't you know history? But for me, it was quite shocking because it's not only I didn't have the right facts, it made me question, why was I taught this at school when what I was taught was actually wrong? And it actually forced me to go on an intellectual journey, which forced me to reevaluate pretty much everything that I was taught in history, right? Because as I mentioned to some of my friends, when I was taught history at school, especially the period of colonization, we were taught as French children, we colonized the rest of the world to civilize them. Not a new idea, but also undoing all of that was kind of what I mean by changing your mindset. It was very painful emotionally. Okay? So adult learning, changing mindsets. Now let's go to the life of Malcolm X. Before I continue, I wanted to mention one Malay proverb. Right? When I was taught how to give talks, you should always mention a Malay proverb. And one of my favorite Malay proverb is, seperti kata di bawah tempurung. Okay? You're underneath a coconut shell. Of course, you don't realize you're underneath a coconut shell. Someone has to help you lift that coconut shell. Okay, so symbolically, I think that's what Malcolm X is all about. So I see the life of Malcolm X in three phases. The first phase, as we saw in the video, he grew up in a small town. The environment in the United States was so incredibly racist. As a person reading his autobiography, I was shocked. Like, that happened in the US, it never happened in Europe. And what happened in the US was absolutely insane as a European. Reading that, it was really, really, really very, very shocking. Because he was in a small town, there was this reality. He never questioned it. He thought it was absolutely normal. It was only when he started going to larger towns where there were large Black communities that he started developing his identity. So he went to Boston, he went to New York, and he started mixing with the wrong people, and then he got involved in crime. Okay? So this is what I call his first phase of his education, where he was discovering himself, but he was really discovering himself by observing other people and comparing himself with other people. But in the end, it led him to, you can call it misguidance, right? Ended up in prison and all of that. Okay? So adult learning by itself is not the solution. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Second phase of his life, he's in prison. He meets a prisoner that encourages him to complete his formal education. So we saw that. Some of his family members converted to Nation of Islam. They started preaching to him, and he gradually accepted Nation of Islam. Now, Nation of Islam is a very strange concept. It's a mixture of Islam, it's a mixture of Christianity, it's a mixture of Black nationalism. It can only exist in the United States in that period of time. Right? The 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s in the US was just bizarre. Okay, and out of that, Nation of Islam rose. So there's one thing about this which caught my eye is that's the period where he started talking to the press a lot. And one thing, when I read his biography, what was very, very clear is he was very skilled at dealing with the press. And the press would always push a quote unquote white narrative, and he wouldn't change the discourse. He had something to say, he said it. Whether people liked it or not, he stuck to his narrative. And I think one of the takeaways that we can maybe think about is, how do we train people to deal with the media? Because often we end up changing the narrative in order to suit the media. That's one issue. But ultimately, if you are involved in adult learning, but you're interacting with the wrong people, again, more towards ideology like Nation of Islam, you end up being confused and misguided as well. Then there's the third phase of his life where there starts to have problems in the Nation of Islam. He discovers the moral weaknesses of Elijah Muhammad, the founder. And in 1962, for some reason, he was banned. And then he starts hearing rumors that the Nation of Islam is trying to kill him. In fact, one person who was asked to put a bomb in his car actually came and see him and said, "This is what I was told that I should do. I'm not going to do it, but I just want you to know this is what's happened." And then in his autobiography, he says, "I started thinking for myself." And as Prof. Farid was speaking, I realized something that I hadn't made or written down in my notes. Malcolm X was teaching other people to be critical thinkers, but yet he wasn't yet critical about his own critical thinking with regards to his relationship with Nation of Islam. That was something really ironic and paradoxical that I still have to kind of think about in a little bit more detail. But what I'm trying to say, it's very easy to be telling other people to be critical thinkers, while you yourself are still thinking in a very non-critical way. And that's maybe the challenge of critical thinking and adult learning. But there's no doubt when you read his biography, the turning point of his life was going for Hajj. And the way he describes it is very simple. He met Muslims from all over the world, all different colors, all different races, and they had one common theme. They were nice people. That's it. Akhlaq, good manners. Okay? And I can relate to this because I came to Malaysia in 1992. I was 22 years old. I wasn't yet a Muslim. And I fell in Malaysia because I met people who were nice. So, you know, sometimes when we talk about dawah, we forget the most obvious. It all starts with akhlaq. Now, again, by this time, Malcolm X had gone through a very emotional reassessment of his life, right? When you find out that the people that you've worked with for 12, 13, 14 years are trying to kill you, that's not something that is easy. And there's one paragraph in his autobiography which really caught my eye, which also made me think. So I'm quoting from his autobiography. That morning, so he just started doing his Hajj. He's started thinking about his experience. That morning was when I first began to reappraise the concept of the white man. It was when I first began to perceive that the white man commonly used means complexion only secondary. Primarily, it describes attitude and actions towards the black man and towards all other non-white men. But in the Muslim world, I had seen that men with white complexions were more generally brotherly than anyone else had been so far. So this idea of not being obsessed with the color of the skin, but being more aware of attitudes and behaviors, that seemed to be something that really struck him, and which meant that when he went back to the United States, he changed his discourse in quite a significant way. Okay. Now, of course, a lot of things can be said more about Malcolm X. I want to kind of link this to what's going on in Malaysia and the way forward. I've been in Malaysia for 25 years, and I've been teaching in different universities in 25 years. What is very obvious is there's a lot of confusion about what is the real nature of education. So historically, there's two ways of thinking about education. One is education is about developing good citizens, right? Simply people who can interact with other human beings in a positive way, in a respectful way, in a kind way. At the end of the day, you as a citizen, you have a moral obligation to uphold the law. You don't uphold the law when it's convenient. You don't uphold the law when you see a police car. You should naturally uphold the law because that's the natural thing to do. And you pay your taxes and all of that. Okay. To be a good citizen, primarily you have to be a critical thinker. You have to have this idea that it's not just about myself, it's I am part of a society, and I value being part of a society, and there's give and take. And you appreciate that everybody in the society has got a positive role to make. Okay. The other way of looking at education, it's basically you go to university to get a job. So I'm an accountant, I'm an engineer, etc., etc. What happens to the society? I don't really care. I just want to make money, right? Unfortunately, many Malaysians are really thinking about getting a job. I'm not saying they're bad citizens, right? I'm not accusing them of being bad citizens. But the way the education system is working at the moment is the priority is just get a job. If you get a job, especially if you get a good paying job, you live happily ever after. That's kind of the scenario. So how do you develop good citizens? I come back to this idea of adult learning. I'm sure many of you who have been to university realize that in many universities, it's not about thinking and reflection. It's much more about just memorizing facts and information. We have to change that. So for me, coming back to what is the legacy of Malcolm X, at a very simple way, it is about developing critical thinking. But critical thinking needs a certain approach, which is adult learning. And a great way to do adult learning is simply traveling, right? It is very significant for me that Malcolm X was limited as long as he was in the United States. He had to travel outside the United States to really expand his field of vision. Okay? For financial reasons, it's not possible for everybody to travel overseas and study overseas, et cetera, et cetera. I absolutely understand that. But especially for those of you who want to be activists, if you don't travel, you will never achieve your potential as an activist. Okay? Now, there's the right way to travel and there's the wrong way to travel. Right? For example, if you're traveling to the UK, you go to Oxford, you go to Cambridge, mashallah, wonderful architecture, that's not the UK. Right? If you want to know what is the UK, you go to London. If you go to London, you will see that there's actually a huge homeless problem. Right? Literally, if you walk down the streets of London at night, people will be sleeping in sleeping bags. It's very ironic. Again, in Paris, they just had the Olympics. First thing that they did is they take all the homeless people and put them out of the way. Because we didn't want the foreigners to know, by the way, I'm French, I should explain that, so I'm allowed to say we. We didn't want the foreigners to see how many homeless people there are in France. But over the last 2 or 3 years, it's now reached like 500,000 or 1 million homeless people in France. Okay. So traveling is not enough. Traveling in the right way, trying to understand what are the problems in the society, and really going out of your way to challenge your mindset. I will finish with this because I realize I still have 7 minutes left. One of the problems we have in the 21st century is this idea of echo chambers. I'm sure you have all heard the term. Echo chambers is when you just talk to people who think exactly like you. So it just becomes an echo, and you just, oh yeah, you're right. When you talk to people who think differently from you, it's sometimes uncomfortable. But that's actually when you learn the most. Right? And one of the things that I'm very grateful for is the fact that having come to Malaysia and living in a multicultural society, you have to kind of get out of your comfort zone. And you have to kind of mix around and you know, go to different places and meet different kinds of people. And sometimes it's strange, right? And sometimes you have very bizarre discussions. Like I remember there was one time we went to, with some friends to an Indian restaurant, and there was like a whole discussion about how should the banana leaf be. I was like, I've never had this kind of discussion before, so I just didn't know what to say. I just kept quiet. But you know, after a while, you're oh, okay, this is interesting, this is new. But there has to be a willingness to get out of the comfort zone and kind of explore new ideas. But that requires maybe a different approach, not just in the education system, media, the amount of stereotyping in Malaysian films is horrible. I don't want to say any more than that, because if I start talking about that, that's another 30 minutes discussion. So anyway, our role as people who are interested in making the society better, I think, is to try to develop that critical thinking, but you cannot get people to develop critical thinking simply by telling them, you shouldn't think like this, you shouldn't think like that. It's more about creating an opportunity for them to challenge their mindsets and to create learning experiences that allows that to happen. And by the way, just reading the autobiography for me was something very, very powerful. I've known about Malcolm X for a long time. I've never read his autobiography. Doing so really, made me think about a lot of things. So that could be a simple thing that you can very easily do. So let me just check my notes. Okay, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Associate Professor Dr. Ridwan Fontaine, for your insightful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the interactive session. So now I will open the floor for Q&A session. So if you have any question, please raise your hand and kindly state your name, your affiliation, and to which panelist your question is directed to. Due to our limited time, please keep your questions short and sweet. Thank you. The gentleman back.
Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for this session. I was surprised actually when I find there's a discussion about Malcolm X, because I first know about it seeing the movie where Denzel Washington played Malcolm X many years back. Before I ask my question, I was actually, I wish to share something, because Prof. Ridwan, you mentioned about the homeless in London. I was a student studying mathematics in University College of London in 91 and 1995. I tried staying with the homeless 3 months, summer 1995. I stayed mainly in Leicester Square. So I know a bit about what happens then. Okay, anyway, my question is just this. Actually, what kind of Islam did Elijah Muhammad bring? Did he pray 5 times and such? Because looking at the movie, I don't know really what kind of Islam. Okay, they preach La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. It seems that Elijah Muhammad is looked up as if he's a prophet, but and the woman wears headscarf, but really, I don't know what kind of Islam that they bring. Do you know anything about that? And really, when Malcolm X was approached by Elijah Muhammad, what was his understanding then? That is my question. Assalamualaikum.
What's your question again? What was your question again? To which panelist your question is directed to?
Oh, okay. Whoever can answer that. I'm not sure. Okay.
At the back.
Assalamualaikum. I'm Cik Noor, advocate and solicitor, non-practicing. For Dr. Said Farid, you spoke of the captive mind in the Philippines and the Malay nationalism. In the political landscape of Malaysia, UMNO in point, the practice of feudalism and the beholden to aristocrat and the leadership. After losing 6 decades of ruling Malaysia, BN UMNO, do you think there's a departure from this mindset, or it is still persistent? Now, in terms of the ruling Malaysia government, do we still look at other nations, aka white nations, US, European, rather than looking at African states? And can I say that the captive mind is still not liberated? And for Dr. Said Farid, when you talk about developing critical thinking, traveling overseas, I have had experience where I go to external university overseas where they tend to be cliquish. Malaysian students, no offense, I've seen like if it's Kelantan, then they will stick with the Kelantan group. They don't stick with the other friends or go to their foreign friends. They're very cliquish. And when I was in Australia, I find the discrimination and prejudice very thickened. And even being someone who is well educated, I do feel that, they're still not open-minded. So can I have your comments in this, even though we travel, but the landscape there is not conducive for us? How then do we expand that? Thank you.
Okay, I will let the panelists to answer the two questions first.
Okay, so first of all, let's address the question about Nation of Islam. He talks about what Nation of Islam believes and the practices in his book. So basically, the beliefs of Nation of Islam was very weird. It's a combination of Islam and Christianity. We have a lot of black nationalism as well. So it doesn't make any sense. That's why I say Black Nation of Islam can only really exist in the United States at that particular time. In terms of the practices, what is very obvious is when Malcolm X did the Hajj, before he was allowed to enter into Saudi, he actually had to learn how to pray. So literally, before doing the Hajj, he wasn't praying the way the Muslims would pray. He probably prayed, like the Christians would do or something like that, but it wasn't a normal prayer the way we pray as Muslims. So it's kind of a very, very strange combination, which honestly, when you read about it, it's quite shocking as a Muslim.
So with regard to the question about Malcolm X religion, the Nation of Islam actually, I think a lot of many people assume that the Nation of Islam religion is or was a part of Islam, or an orientation among the Muslims. And I don't think it was. I think it had some elements of Islam, of Islamic ideas in it, but I really see the Nation of Islam as an heretical branch of Christianity. I mean, the fact is, for example, the leaders like Elijah Muhammad hardly ever quoted from the Quran. They quoted more from the Bible. They had basically distorted ideas of Christianity. For example, they believed that Jesus was black, and they preached the idea that the white man was the incarnation of the devil. So it's basically ideas from Christianity, distorted, and they had very little to do with Islam. But I think the idea that they were Muslims, that their appropriation of the term Islam, for example, had partly to do with the fact that Islam was a non-Christian religion, and Islam was widespread in Africa. Therefore, it was a widespread religion among Africans. So for that reason, they appropriated some aspects of Islam, and due to that, Malcolm X eventually made his way to should I say, the real Islam, or to regular Islam. If the Nation of Islam leaders had chosen another term to refer to their orientation, perhaps Malcolm X would not have found his way to Islam. So I think, in a sense, his journey to Islam was quite accidental, at least from from the point of view of historical point of view. So that's how I look at it. Nation of Islam was not actually part of Islam, and not even a heretical version or interpretation of Islam. It was more part of the Christian tradition, but a heretical dimension of it. With regard to the question on, I think you were asking, lady over there, you were asking about the captive mind and are we in a, I suppose your question was generally, are we in a position to think more independently? No, she doesn't, that's not what she was saying. Let her clarify.
When I talk about the captive mind, I'm touching on the point of, grooming leaders. Like I said, in the UMNO scenario or Malay nationalism, at that point of time, they don't go on merits. They go on the blue blood. If you are a blue blood, then you get chances to become a leader. So to me, the mind is still captive, that you don't go on merits, you don't go on somebody's potential. So after all these years, when that party loses after decades of ruling, are we still beholden to that kind of thinking that, the feudalism, aristocrats, blue bloods still rule the people today? I'm thinking there is still that element of captive mind, because you can't think independently. You look at someone, you think, oh, the father is great, so is the son. That's not right. That's feudalism. This is where I'm coming from. So is there a liberation on this point? Thank you.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Under colonial rule, we were ruled by the British through the Malay rulers. The Malay rulers became salaried officials of the British. And basically, we did not fight for independence. There's no revolution like in the Philippines or in Indonesia. There's no revolution against the Europeans. And so, because there was no revolution, there was no break with colonial ideas. So the Malay elite, and indeed the political elite, Malay and non-Malay, which took over the rule of this country after independence, actually ruled with colonial ideas, with a colonial mentality. For example, all the stereotypes that we have in this country, the stereotypes we have about the Malays, the stereotypes we have about the English, about the Chinese, about the Indians, are inherited from the colonial period. The Malays are lazy, the Chinese are money-minded. The idea that the Chinese are money-minded is a fact. It is seen as a fact, not conceived of as a stereotype or a negative stereotype. It's simply seen as reality. And the Indians, what are the stereotypes about Indians? I can't remember them, but there used to be this idea that they are, prone to drunkenness, for example. That was in the past. But there are other stereotypes, and many stereotypes about all the different races. These are inherited from the colonial period. But in addition to colonial ideas, what has also persisted in our society is what you said, feudalism. Not the feudal system, but a kind of intellectual or cultural feudalism or psychological feudalism. We still defer to authority to people with titles. You know very well, if you live in a certain neighborhood, if you have a title like Dato or Tan Sri, you are served better by by government departments. Government departments are more, or even private organizations are more responsive to you when you have problems in your neighborhood. We are very much a society that cares a lot about titles. So we have this intellectual or cultural feudalism. Now, part of the reason has to do with our neglect of intellectual traditions. We assume that Malay tradition is feudalistic. Of course, it is true that there is a very strong feudal tradition. There's a very strong feudal orientation in Malay tradition. If you read the Malay literature, classical Malay literature, you'll find a very strong emphasis on feudal ideas. But there is also a non-feudal tradition, a non-feudal way of thinking that you can find in the Malay tradition. But that non-feudal or even anti-feudal tradition was never emphasized. During the colonial period, the British scholars of Malay literature emphasized the feudal aspect, because the British had an interest in promoting feudal ideas because they were working with the feudal elites. So the non or anti-feudal ideas that you find in Malay tradition were de-emphasized. And when we, in the post-colonial period, we continue to emphasize, for example, when we teach Malay literature, when we do research on literature, we continue to follow that line of thinking, as if as if the dominant tradition among the Malays was feudalistic. But for example, you have Tajus Salatin of Bukhari Jauhari. It was a work composed beginning of the 17th century. Very anti-feudal. This is around the early 1600s. But he wrote that the ruler, the Sultan, has to be under the law and does not deserve loyalty if he is not placed under the law. And in this whole discussion in the Tajus Salatin, which is a kind of advice to rulers, was anti-feudal. But these anti-feudal ideas were never emphasized during the colonial period. They were downplayed, and that downplaying is continued into the post-colonial period because of our feudal mentality, even in scholarship. So much so that people don't imagine that there was an anti-feudal tradition in Malay thought, in the history of Malay thought. So that's why I'm saying we need to reconnect with our tradition. In any civilization, you will have a tradition of negative, backward ideas, and you'll have a tradition of positive, progressive ideas. Our problem is that we tend to stress in our education system the negative, which we put forward as positive. Like, for example, we talk about loyalty to the rulers. We talk about blind loyalty to the rulers as a positive trait. For this reason, we are confused about Hang Tuah. We are very confused about it. There are so many people in this country, including scholars, who think that Hang Tuah should be a hero. To me, it is crazy. It is unimaginable that a man who was willing to do the murderous bid of Sultan in those days, that there can still be doubt and controversy. Maybe we should consider him as a hero. Very strange. There's something wrong with our sense of morality, even though we are Muslims, but seems like we don't really know what is right and wrong when it actually comes to, we'll talk about akhlaq and adab. In the abstract, it's all fine. When it comes actually to applying it, looking at historical cases, we don't seem to be able to do so. That's why this whole idea of intellectual traditions is very important. Malcolm X was very clear, very strong. He was clear about right and wrong. He was not a hypocrite. He spoke about the elephant in the room, that proverbial elephant in the room. He spoke about it. He spoke in very clear terms. He was not diplomatic. That's, I think, some lessons we can learn from Malcolm X. Don't be diplomatic. Critique things as they are. And don't refrain from criticism for fear of not being popular. We have too much of fear about that in this country.
Perhaps we can take one more question, the last one. The guy at the back in the suit.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for the engaging session. My question is with regards to education and to Dr. Ridwan. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he talked about education. He talked about how education is important to create a good citizen in society. My question is with regards to the idea of dependency, because Rousseau talked about how people shouldn't be people should be dependent in order for them to be good citizens. So how do we actually wean off that idea of dependency? For example, it's always mentioned that it's easier to learn something than to unlearn something. And as adults, it's always difficult to look back upon the past, upon things that we might know and which we might take for granted, and for us to change those ideas into something which is better for us as individuals and as a collective in society. And the other question is with regards to how, Prof. Farid just mentioned about how to be critical and to not be afraid of, probably talking about the status quo. And our education system, unfortunately, doesn't promote critical thinking. It creates a citizenry that is lazy, intellectually lazy. I mean, there's a book, Sekolah Bukan Penjara, University Bukan Kilang, which talks about this, right? Universities are not supposed to be factories where they create citizens and good workers. So in Malaysia, unfortunately, this is a big issue, as mentioned. So how do we actually overcome this problem? Is it a matter of political will? Is it a matter of, can we see it in the next generation? Is that the case? Thank you very much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I'm actually quite optimistic about the future of Malaysia. So let me start there. The problem that we are describing is a problem that exists all over the world. Right? It's not a Malaysian problem, it's a universal problem. When I go to France, I see the critique of the French education system, and they're exactly the same as the critique of the Malaysian education system. So it's really, there's no big difference. I think my take on the Malaysian education system is there's almost a paranoia about the syllabus. It's always about, let's try to make a better syllabus. And I think the Malaysian syllabus as it is fine. What has to be valued is literally empowering people to teach the syllabus in a more creative way. For example, if alhamdulillah, I'm in the International Islamic University in Malaysia, if I want to explore new ways to teach a course, I have no issue with my head of department. I'm actually encouraged to do so. In other institutions that I know, which I will not name, if you try to be creative with teaching a course that has already been taught for X number of years, your head of department say, what are you doing? Like, why are you trying to be smart? Just do what you're supposed to do. Do what we have been doing for so long. Coming back to something that Prof mentioned about the ranking of universities. I know ranking of universities is a big issue. Probably Dr. Mazli has got so many points on this issue. But one of the things that I think is not very well understood is when you become a research university, your focus is so much on research that you actually don't care about educating students. And so if you want to be a good researcher, you basically give the minimum amount of information to your students, and then you just focus on your research and you get promoted. I'll just give one short story to illustrate this, because this, when I heard this, shocked me and made me think, right? Which is what really this forum is all about. This is a story that was told by one of my former colleagues who was British, and he was attached to the University of Manchester. And one of his colleagues at University of Manchester was doing his PhD. He asked for some kind of leave from the university to complete his PhD, and the University of Manchester basically said no. And this person was so upset that he decided he was going to become the teacher from hell. And he treated all of his students in a horrible way, to the point that every semester the students complained to the head of department and said, please don't give this lecture to us. So in the end, this lecture ended up with almost no teaching. He had a lot of opportunities to do research, and he became professor. Allahu Akbar. It's insane. But that's the reality of focusing too much on research. So I'm not saying we should become teaching universities. I'm saying there has to be a balance. In the current education system, if you are a good teacher, you're basically not rewarded for being a good teacher, right? That's one issue. The second issue, which is something that I only recently discovered, is most educators don't know much about adult learning. So this is really, for me, this is the educational technique which I think is the most likely to create a new generation of critical thinkers. And many teachers might have heard the name, but they don't really know how to implement it in practice. But again, one thing that I want to make sure everybody understands, the new generation is different, right? So maybe if you're talking about people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, they're thinking in a certain way. The students who I'm dealing with who are in their 20s, they have a very, very, very different mindset than their peers or people before them. So one way or another way, change is on its way.
So I'd like to add to some of those points. And this has to do with what our universities can do. I think we have to realize that our universities are in a very critical state. If you just take, for example, this discussion on Malcolm X, such discussions are happening more and more outside of the universities rather than in the universities. They're happening in institutions like research institutions or think tanks like IAIS or other institutions. Universities are more and more becoming places which are unlikely to discuss critical issues in a creative manner. And a lot of this has to do with the very poor state of our universities, the mediocre state of university education. This is something that is not, well, I think it has begun to be discussed even openly in the media, but we're not addressing it. We're not actually dealing with it. Now, we don't have time to talk about the details, but let me just give you one example. This forum, the subtitle is A Journey of Empowerment and Equality. Empowerment and equality is the opposite of exploitation. Now, how can our universities be spaces for empowerment and equality when we are actually teaching exploitation to our students? We are teaching exploitation to our students. We are teaching them how to be exploitative and how to take advantage of people. How do we do that? Because, for example, we have a rule in our universities in Malaysia that graduate students, as a requirement for graduation, have to co-author their articles with their supervisors. It is forced. The co-authorship is forced. That's the first dishonesty, the first unethical act. The second is that in many cases, probably in the majority of cases, when the supervisor co-authors an article with a student, he or she doesn't do the work. Because when you co-author work, you have to be a co-author. A co-author means you are doing half of the work. If there are two co-authors, one is a supervisor, one is a student, you should be doing half of the work. In most cases, they don't do any work at all. That's why it happens, and maybe this is very unique to Malaysia. An anthropology professor, for example, I'm giving fictitious examples, but they reflect reality. An anthropology professor who specializes in the anthropology of a village in Kelantan has got articles in his CV, publications about Nigeria, about Iran, about Egypt, where he has never stepped foot. And he doesn't know Arabic, he doesn't know Hausa, one of the Nigerian languages, doesn't know Persian, never done field work in those places. But how come he's expert on Nigeria, on Iran, on Egypt, on so many places? Because his articles are co-authored with his graduate students. This is so exploitative. You force students to write, to co-author with their professors. So the credit doesn't go completely to the students. It's a form of exploitation. It beefs up the CV of the professors. They have so many publications. This is very unethical, very wrong. How can you teach our students correct behavior, honesty, intellectual honesty, when they are forced to go through this? This is just one of the few things that are wrong with our universities. For our universities to really be centers of excellence, don't teach exploitation, and also don't dehumanize our students and our lecturers. One of the ways in which our lecturers are dehumanized is that they are forced to clock in. You treat them like factory workers. Even factory workers shouldn't be treated that way, I feel, right? But the idea of clocking in is a tool of capitalism. The idea is that workers cannot be trusted. They must be surveyed. They must be controlled. Clocking in is one of those means. Why do you do that for lecturers? Why do you reduce, create a morale problem by forcing clocking in? It's unheard of in the rest of the world. Universities asking lecturers to clock in. Why should you care whether lecturers come to office or not? Isn't it? It's not important for lecturers to come to office. The best scholars in the best universities of the world don't go to their office all the time. It's not necessary. As long as the professor is available when the students need to talk to the professor. That's all that's important. And the professors should be writing, researching, publishing. Who cares where they're doing it? It's ridiculous that they must be sitting in their office, writing their articles. They can be at home, they can be in a cafe, in a kopitiam, doesn't matter. And important is that they are teaching properly. They come to campus to teach. When the students need to discuss, to talk about their thesis, they are available. What's happening now? Professors are coming, clocking in, then leaving campus, not available to their students. Our students in our universities forever complain that the professors are not available for consultation. So the whole ethic of being available and being accessible to the students is not there. And so this is just the tip of the iceberg of the problems in our universities. Can they be solved? Very easily. Put the right people in charge of the universities. The right vice-chancellors, the right deans of departments, the right head of departments. They don't have to be great scholars. They just have to understand the academic culture. And leave the professors free, the lecturers, leave them free to do their research, to interact with their students. You'll create a great atmosphere. People will be happy. It's very easy, actually. I don't understand why it's not being done.
Thank you to our both panelists for their answer. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this forum session. We hope you have found the discussion insightful and enlightening. There's more. Okay, but please keep your questions short and sweet. All right.
Thank you so much. I would like to, maybe share with you about some of the things that I've shared with Dr. Mazli. I believe that we already reached that stage of education crisis. One, the performance for our primary education is really bad. We have a lost generation of pupils after the post-COVID issue. So our pupils are functional illiterates. Basically, they don't know how to read. Yeah. And then this generation are not interested to go to university. So before we talk about what's happening at our university, this is an appalling state, I must admit, because I'm doing my PhD at this one university, Prof. So we need to look at it from a systems angle or something like that. I just want your really short view on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this forum session. We hope you have found the discussion insightful and enlightening. We thank to all our speakers for sharing their valuable perspective. And we also would like to extend our gratitude to participants attending today's forum here at IIS Malaysia and to our viewers who are watching us on Facebook Live. Thank you for your participation and kind attention. We look forward to seeing you all again in our upcoming forum. With that, I'll pass back the mic back to MC for the next agenda. Thank you again. Have a great weekend. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Can we appreciate them more, please? Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Brother Muhammad, and our panelists for this very important discussion. A total overhaul of not only our educational system, but also how we relate with things from personal, interpersonal to community, and of course to how our nations are run. This is quite an elaborate session where not only Malcolm X was discussed, but also the world at large. And I hope that our takeaways from this forum is going to change how we do our things personally, growing our self-determination, growing beyond the self to the selfless service to the community, and how we want to be remembered afterwards. And of course, what we do now have a significant impact on how people study us after our lives. And this is why it's important that always we look beyond now. And this is the trajectory of the future. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you as you give us these very important insights from your wealth of knowledge and experience. Thank you very much, and we appreciate the forum with the moderator. Alhamdulillah, we are coming closer to, inshallah, you can remain in the stage, no problem, inshallah. The panelists can remain there because shortly, inshallah, they will be requested to come up. So we are coming closer to the end of this program, but it's always important, as we have opened the session with some remarks, it's good we also close with some remarks. And in this guise, permit me to honorably recognize the presence of young Babahagia, Dr. Muhammad Noor Manuti, the Chairman, Institute of Islamic Understanding, Malaysia, who is here with us personally, and we indulge to listen to a closing speech from his personal self, inshallah, before we move to the next item of the agenda. So may I invite the Honorable to the stage, inshallah, to make the closing remarks. The mic, yeah, closing remarks, inshallah. Thank you, sir.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Our dear friend, Brother Mazli Malik, Chairman of IAIS, Brother Haji Engineer Muhammad Jamaluddin Samshuddin, CEO of Exin, our respected Professor Said Farid Al-Attas, and our respected scholar, Associate Ridwan Fontaine from Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences of First and foremost, I want to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt that vaccine as well as AIS has been able to conduct this very important forum after 40 years, more than even 40 years, the demise of Malcolm X in a very tragic assassination. No doubt this kind of program is very important in order to not only to theorize of his thinking, minds, actions, but rather to see that the continuing efforts to spread out this message of universalism, this message of equality, this message of international or universal brotherhood, social justice, and so forth. One of the most important aspects of Malcolm X's life was his transformation after embracing Islam. He is often remembered as a new convert to Islam, but at the same time, he was very much engaged to perform Hajj, because this is part and parcel of his dream to see a new sort of religiosity in his life. During his pilgrimage to the Kaaba, Malcolm X prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to one God, and at the same time, he also made prayers that Allah will allow his family to come over to Mecca and perform Hajj like what he did. So, in contrast, I would like also to say here, if Malcolm X performed Hajj in a full embracing commitment and full of ritual experiencing, I'm a bit surprised to see here that even in this building, I attended a very special discussion on the issue of human rights, violation of human rights, conducted by IAIS with MAPIM and also through the cooperation of UNHR, United Nations Human Resource. In that conference, I was shocked to see a presentation by one of the volunteers from MAPIM, one of the biggest Islamic organizations in the country, in fighting social justice and upholding human rights across all races and religions. A group of Malaysian Umrah performed in Mecca, and it became a story in that video that they were very, very harsh to a group of settlers among Rohingya refugees in the area of Julutung, Penang. So the Mosque Committee, the Mosque Committee made a special prayer in Kaaba, asking Allah not to allow any more colonialists come to Malaysia in the name of Rohingyas. This happened. sort of racial and religious prejudices happen in the country, with a group of the so-called ritualists who want to perform Hajj, perform Umrah in Makkatul Mukarramah. So it is very strange to see that kind of happenstance happened in the country, whereby we are living in a multiracial societies, and also there are rights for refugees to be protected in their life through our own religion, our own tradition, a part of United Nations, although we might have some differences in terms of treatment. So in this context, I want to say that some of the Islamic organizations in the country have taken some good steps in the 90s, like ABIM, and followed up by some other small agencies and also NGOs to show Malcolm X film throughout the country. This is a very good practice, and we hope that after this program of rebrand of the program for Malcolm X, that we will see, inshallah, more active programs could be done in order to educate masses in the country that the importance of principles of cardinal principles of Islam and other traditions of religions and other traditions of world civilization, that is to fight for justice, equality, human rights, protection of human dignity, and so forth. So this kind of program, we hope that also should be continued to be provided not only to the older generation, but what is more important is to the younger generation of Malaysia's plurality society, whereby they can be educated in order to disseminate the grand vision of Malcolm X, rahimahullah. I must say that Malcolm X, after we read of his biography, was a unique reformist. Was a unique reformist in the big land, the so-called land of liberty of America, with all the traditions in the past, present, and perhaps future, what we are witnessing today, the loss of human dignity after the 7th October Gaza war. So we do hope, inshallah, that all other organizations in the country can be taken much more oriented action in order to see that the dream of Malcolm X, even other leaders of human rights throughout the world can be seen to be much more practical and spread out, not only in terms of thinking, spirit, but what is much more important in terms of actions in all dimensions of life, be it religion, politics, social, education, moral, and so forth. In this context, I would like also to say that IKIM, Institute of Islamic Understanding, has undertaken some practical steps as a beginning to spread out the need of respecting human rights from 1990s. The latest development 2-3 days ago, even myself and also Brother Dr. Jamal, we were together in International Conference of Human Dignity for Southeast Asia. For the first time, 9 muftis came to this conference. In the history of religiosity of the country, 9 muftis came and participated in the conference. And also the speech of Sultan of Perak was indeed par excellence in the context of what is happening in the world today with the messages from Islam and other traditions. Besides that, we are also glad to say here that the government also, through the Madani government, has taken some more practical steps in order to see that unity of mind among all people of Malaysia of different religions, cultures, and traditions. We have formed the very practical National Committee of Interrelations between all religions. And there are some good progress, at least insofar we have 3 meetings. We have 3 meetings which are much more practical, inshallah. And we have also established different committees, including one bureau just to discuss issues in regard to all religions, where we want to see that things not to be outside to the newspaper, but rather to be discussed first. It's all facts, and try to find formulas inside this very important committee. So I would say that this is a great contribution, perhaps, to the Malcolm X of his aspiration to see that a unity of world, to see that men should be in one brotherhood, irrespective of different religions, social, class status, and so forth. With this, again, I must thank to IAS for inviting me, and also congratulations to Aksin and all participants, including our panelists, taking part in this program. And may Allah bless all of us. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Words of elders are words of wisdom. We have really seen wisdom personified in the great Honorable Datuk Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti. Thank you very much for this elderly and very inspiring speech. Indeed, it is a closing speech, but it is an opening for many other speeches that might come worthwhile. Thank you very much. And as we thank you very much for sitting quite attentively, taking notes of what is happening, Alhamdulillah, we thank each and every one of us for sparing our times, our energy, and of course our faculties to internalize what we have been saying since morning till now. Jazakumullahu khairan. And Alhamdulillah, we have to say that man la yashkurun nas la yashkurullah. Whoever does not say thank you to people will certainly not say that to God. In line with that, we would like to appreciate these very important personalities, our panelists, with some token of appreciation, for which I would like to invite Dr. Mazli to the high elevated platform, together with Brother Muhammad Jamaluddin, to help us hand over some of the souvenirs to our great personalities of the day, starting with, inshallah, Datuk Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti, to receive the token of appreciation for his time and service to humanity. Thank you very much. We appreciate you, and we hope that Allah will appreciate you the more. Inshallah, the same personalities will give to Professor Dr. Syed Farid Alatas token of appreciation also for his contributions and service to humanity in this regard. May God accept as an act of ibadah. Thank you very much. Jazakumullahu khairan. Again, to the second panelist, Associate Professor Dr. Ridwan Fountain, to also get this token of appreciation. And we say thank you very much. Jazakumullahu khairan. I don't know how it is going to be done. You know, when we appreciate others, we need also to be appreciated. Brother Muhammad Jamaluddin will hand over to Dr. Mazli Malik. Yeah, also a token of appreciation, who is our host. And of course, we appreciate the appealing, conducive environment that you give us to have this very important gathering. Thank you very much. And we hope God will bless you and will continue to help us serve humanity in the best ways we can. Alhamdulillah. Fajazakumullahu khairan. And this is the end of the session all, but we cannot end without praying for the success of these two giant organizers of this program. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to strengthen you, to always give you the wisdom and of course the foresight to always see for the ummah what will be best for the next generation, and of course to refine our ways of doing things. Thank you very much, and we hope to have a group photo. There's a record of the past, will always inspire the future. So please, we thank you very much. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.